Gosh, I'm the only speaker. Wow. Okay. It's a little bit of pressure there. Hi, everyone. And thank you for this whole conference and everyone who set it up. It's just been so wonderful so far and all this energy all over. So thank you for all that. I'm Bettina Fabos. I am a professor of interactive digital studies at the University of Northern Iowa in Iowa, which is in the US. And I have created a piece called Proud and Torn, and it's available online to anyone at proudandtorn.org. And I'm going to read the prologue and then take you through some of the components of the project, because it's a really big project. It's got 16 chapters. It's a really big project. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we made certain choices, why we were drawn to certain kinds of visual storytelling techniques. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about how we were incentivized through various archives to build the project in the way that we did. So here's the prologue. First of all, this is the title page, Proud and Torn, a visual memoir of Hungarian history. This is a story about a sister and a brother born in Hungary in the 1930s and previous generations of their family, presented in a visual interactive storytelling format and documented from the archives of personal, national, and world events. Proud and Torn tells the history of Hungarian nationalism, totalitarianism, and the Holocaust, helping us understand the politics and culture of Eastern Europe. So I'm the writer, producer, and creator. I worked with two incredible historians, Leslie Waters and Christina Posman, who are both professors in their own right of history in various parts of America. The designer is Dana Potter. It was three developers who worked on the project, Colin Cahill, Jacob Espenscheid, and Connor Thorson, and then an animator, Isaac Campbell, who I work with a lot to this day. So as you can see, there's a vertical component and there's also a horizontal component. So there's a lot of that. It goes from vertical to horizontal, and I'm controlling this by just scrolling. So I'm actually using my keypad and I'm scrolling down, and I'm able to access the horizontal. And we kind of like the tension between horizontal and vertical scrolling. So as you can see, there's a timeline on the bottom. So as I scroll along this very visual timeline with lots of photomontage elements, I can also click on like different dates down on the timeline and scoot along on the bottom. So I am accessing, 1944, and I click over to 1944. I'm going to click all the way to 1956, and I'm all the way in 1956. And if I keep on going to the epilogue, then it notches down to the end of the story. So I'm going to start, as I said, with the prologue. Very short, it's about 5 minutes long, and it'll give you a sense of some of the themes in the project. So, prologue. Pictured here are my aunt and father posing for a photograph in their Sunday best in 1939. They grew up in a flourishing farming family in a little town in Western Hungary called Marcali. In Hungarian, the C is always soft, making a ts sound. Try saying tsica in Hungarian. It means cat. The town was not far from the biggest freshwater lake in Europe, Lake Balaton. Have you heard of it? This is a picture of Ari and Yula tending to the fields, and in the background, I don't know if you can see this, but there's Lake Balaton. Their family was ethnically Magyar, Catholic, and part of an emerging middle class. Their town was typical of farming towns in Hungary. It was mostly Catholic, with smaller populations of Protestants, Jews, and Greek Orthodox, and its people were mostly poor peasants. Downtown Marcali also supported a growing number of merchants, craftsmen, lawyers, journalists, and tradesmen who made up the middle class. There were a few people of nobility. One aristocratic family in particular, the Széchenyi family, lived in a castle in the center of town. And like many Hungarian towns, there was a community of disenfranchised Roma living in the outskirts. Ari and Jula's family, my family, the Fabos family, was right in the middle class, in the middle of Hungary, in the middle of Europe, and in the middle of some of the most catastrophic years in Hungary's and Europe's history. They suffered, not as much as some, and much more than others. And by the time Ari and Gyula were in grade school, the Fabos family had achieved middle-class prosperity. Their father, Pista, bought a fancy German camera and documented life on the farm, providing a glimpse of rural Hungary in the 20th century. On hot summer days, the two siblings cooled off with their cousins in Lake Balaton, only a few kilometers from home. It's very shallow, like a giant bathtub, and muddy around the edges, perfect for freshwater clams. Today, these photos are my window into this far-off Hungarian world. I am American. My father, Gyula, left Hungary in 1956. I grew up looking at these photos and wondering what his and Ari's lives were really like. Why does their story matter? My favorite Hungarian novelist, Sándor Márai, summed it up best. There are days when everything personal and worldly intermeshes, when history becomes a private matter, a palpable personal reality. Proud and Torn is a history of Ari and Gyula and previous generations of their family. Through them, it is also a history of Hungary. My Hungarian family's personal lives, as remarkable or unremarkable as they were drastically impacted by the decisions and actions of world leaders. Most histories of Hungary focus only on, sorry, the Zoom is in the way. Most histories of Hungary focus only on the nation's great men, emphasizing high politics, aristocrats, and the view from Budapest. But there is so much more to the story. Agricultural workers, small town residents, women, and other forgotten individuals, like my family members, all lived and made Hungarian history. This story begins centuries before there even was a place called Hungary and ends in 1956, when the lives of Ari and Gyula, these two siblings and best friends, these two lovely people who became my aunt and my father, were sent in drastically different directions. My appreciation for Hungary and Hungarians is endless. But time after time, Hungarians made decisions based on pride, and these were not always the greatest decisions. And sometimes Hungarians ripped their own country and my family apart. Hungary, proud and torn, my family survived Hungarian history just barely. So that's the prologue, and then you can proceed from here to the backstory, or you can access the backstory through this tab up here, or you can go to any chapter that you want along this timeline, this interactive timeline. So I'm just going to click on the 1930 chapter right in the middle of the piece. Again, it's 16 chapters, and tell you a little bit of some of the components of the project. They always start with an introductory chapter that focuses on some of the family members. So these are the same two characters, but just at a younger age, such little cuties. So this is when they were in the 1930s. And this is the story of that family and what was happening to them in the 1930s and what was happening to Hungary in the 1930s, and also what was happening in their actual town, Marteli, in the 1930s. So as you can see, there's lots of photographs in this project. There's about 1,000 overall, which is a lot. The photographs come from my family collection. This is from my family collection. They also come from all these different sources. They come from national archives. They come from a range of different archives. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about one particular archive in particular. But part of what you see here is a mixture of many photographs. So, like a photo montage, there's lots and lots of photo montage techniques, and that's really intentional throughout the project. And some of the images, as you can see, we have actually animated, and others are just, are regular pictures. You'll see, again, lots of photographs throughout the piece, but I want to also emphasize that we have sort of like a desire to create a sort of lyricism and movement throughout. And part of the movement you get through the parallax scrolling and through just the the scrolling of this interactive piece. But another way that you get movement is through these looped videos. So that's another component. We've got photographs, we've got looped videos, and some of the looped videos are actually video or film clips, and others are actually animated photographs, as you saw up here. This is also a looped video, but it started as an image, as a straight off photograph. And I have to say that I was, and we were inspired by the Harry Potter series, because we loved, Sirius Black, when you open the newspaper and you saw, a looped video of Sirius Black screaming. And that was just a really wonderful way of communicating to me, just a little bit of movement without committing the time to watch a video. Actually, I started as a documentary filmmaker, and I moved towards interactive digital storytelling because I liked how you could give the viewer, the user, a choice of how much time to spend with a visual element. Whereas in linear video world, you're expecting somebody to sit through 1 minute, 2 minute, whatever content. So this is a really nice, like a compromise to show the movement, but without the commitment of time, just repeats. So I'm just going to scroll down so you can see some other visual elements like this parallax scrolling. We try to achieve a lot of depth in various parts of the project. Here's another looped video. This is a family photograph from my own collection that we that we animated. This is my dad. And here, sometimes we like to pair visual elements like you saw above and here as well. So there's the photographs, there's the loop videos all throughout. I think we have over 60 looped videos, and we have about 50 or 60 photographs per chapter. Each chapter takes about 20 minutes to read, 20 or 30 minutes, depending on the chapter. So another element that I wanted to talk to you about is the text. So we have different styles of text. We have 4 different styles of text. And the first style is just regular printed, regular font. This is Georgia that we use. And we are using this font to communicate more objective style storytelling, although in the prologue, which I read to you, it's not quite objective, but most of the time the story is told through this this very straightforward font. And then there is this other font, which we call Bettina font, because it actually is built from my own handwriting. In fact, if you're interested, I can send you the TTF file and you can upload this very font into your own computer. So we developed this font, and this font is used for a little playful commentary, just to break up the story in a way and to offer a way for me as the American voice, the American daughter's voice, to express either dismay or understanding or questions. So that's what the role of that font is. And then if I keep on scrolling down, we'll come up with some other examples. This here is another font that we use for quotes. So anytime there's a quote, and we have lots of them throughout, we have always animated the quotes. So they're not only in this kind of white and brown blocky font that we try to display as sort of like cut paper, that you just kind of pieces of paper that kind of are displayed a little haphazardly. So that is that. And then there's one more kind of font, and that's those orange and white info boxes. I'm just going to scroll down until we find one. It's a little bit further down. You can see lots of looped videos. And this is a photograph that looks a lot like a film clip, but we animated this one. And then down more to an orange box. Right, it's coming. Here. And we animate the orange boxes in. And those orange boxes are really for the purpose of just little info boxes that clarify a definition oftentimes, or some other kind of little factoid. That's all the elements of the piece, and you can see elements of that all through. And what I wanted to do is spend a little time with you on showing our backstory, and then also our last chapter. And then I'll talk about a little about the archives that we used to build this project. So I'm going to go to the backstory. This is the first chapter we did, and it took us forever because we are still working out a lot of the details. But it was also the one, because it's the backstory, for which we had the least amount of visuals, of photographs. So we had to build them, actually. And in this case, we are I'm scrolling, by the way, as I'm talking. And as I'm scrolling, I am explaining or accessing this animation. It's all built through CSS code. And we're basically explaining the story of this region of Europe called the Carpathian Basin. And here is a map visual. And we want to highlight this freshwater lake because it's where, like, the point of this arrow is where this family of mine had their little village right there. And the Balaton plays a huge central role in the whole story. It's a big theme throughout. So I'm keeping on scrolling. I'm scrolling down, and as I'm scrolling, new things pop up. We explain at certain times in 20 CE that it was controlled by the Roman Empire, that there were all these tribes in 3075, all these different tribes that populated the Carpathian Basin. And we focus on two of those tribes, the Slavs, who came up with the name Lake Balaton, which is something. And then the Huns, which is a group of people that are sometimes confused with the term or word Hungarian. So they disappeared early on. And then the early empires. We have 3 early empires in the Carpathian Basin. I'm still scrolling, by the way. I'm scrolling down, and as I'm scrolling, I'm controlling this whole animation. I'm controlling the orange line going around. I'm controlling the speed of all of this animation. And here you see the trip, or the mapping journey of the Magyars, who started all the way in the Ugric homeland and made their way to the Carpathian Basin in 1895. And then we are ready for the next step. And here we see a very famous Hungarian painting, which shows or depicts this incredible scene of, the great Magyars who conquered the existing empires at the time. And it's very long. Again, we go from vertical to horizontal often in the piece. And I do want to point out that we had a lot of fun building this. We have some audio elements in here. So if I click on any of these, we're explaining the Hungarians. We're trying to explain Hungarian nationalism, and we're trying to explain the very unique nature of the Hungarian language. We're trying to explain those kind of like nationalistic symbols of Hungary, like this crown, which you can go and see in the Parliament building in Budapest. And we comment on this crown. And we tell more stories about how the Hungarian nobility took charge, the Magyars, and who, this is sort of like the national story in a way, but we're critiquing it throughout the piece. And I wanted to show you this animation because it's really quite wonderful. We took a beautiful etching and we animated it. And there's one more animation in this piece, because again, as I said, we had to build a lot of the stories without photographs, just building based on artworks that we then brought to life. History, especially the history of Hungary, is pretty complicated, and we wanted to make it visual. We wanted to make it enjoyable to experience, and we wanted to make it really clear, because our audience in a lot of ways was, everybody, but we were also thinking of young kids and students. And we thought, wow, if we can make this interesting for young people, then we are, if we can make Hungarian history understandable to a 9-year-old, then we've achieved something. And we've heard that, yes, indeed, 9-year-olds are into this piece. So those are a little bit of some elements in the backstory. And then I just wanted to pop over to our last chapter. And by the time we were editing and writing this chapter, it was, we had a well-oiled machine in our team. And it's by far the most complicated chapter, both in terms of writing and also visually, because we were trying to depict a revolution. But at the same time, it was almost the easiest chapter that we worked on, because we were so good at this time at making and visualizing these stories. So I just wanted to show you that we also used a different style in the images, where some of the images have a little bit of a brown tone, and some of the images have a blue tone. And I wanted to explain to you how intentional that was, how we were trying to go for a sense of variety for sure, a sense of aesthetic continuity also, but also we were going for depth. And as you can see here, when you juxtapose the brown sepia and the blue sepia, there's just this really enjoyable sense of depth that you can convey. And so with these photomontage scenes, and if you can see, it's a parallax as well, where the background moves a little more slowly than the foreground. And so again, we wanted to have these images kind of come to life, to kind of pop, and to be really enjoyable to the person who was scrolling. There's a couple more images. If you can see, brown sepia tone, blue sepia tone, brown sepia tone. We made strategic choices to vary it so that it was balanced and pleasurable. So that's a bit of an introduction, and I would encourage you to read it. It takes about 3.5 hours to read from beginning to end, and each chapter is about 20 minutes. Takes about 20 minutes, and it's again the story of all of Hungary through the eyes of nobodies. And I think what I want to say is that everybody has a story, and that this is just a story that came out of my experience. But I was so interested in communicating through this project that little people history matters, that the official narratives can be challenged, and alternative stories can be told through people who are typically not seen as relevant to history. My aunt is a really good example of this. She was very resistant to having her story being seen as important. And in fact, I'm just going to click to the epilogue. I have to move the Zoom again to access it. She actually comes across as the most wonderful and interesting character, and she's someone who's so modest and never thinks that she's interesting at all. And yet the details that she was able to author through this story are so compelling and so wonderful. And it turns out that we uncovered in this project all of this artwork that we had never seen before. This is Ari. And part of the story is about how she was able to become an artist. And we didn't even know that she was a data visualization artist. So this is some of her work that became part of this project. So yes, why telling these stories matter and how we got here. I was thinking when we started this project that it would be very, 6-month project. where I wanted to briefly investigate the story of my dad and my aunt. Backstory is that my father became a professor, and he is a little full of himself. He died actually in February, and he very interesting guy, very robust character, but he wrote a book about himself where he pretty much put himself in the center of the story. And it was darling that he wrote this book about himself, but he had always talked about his friendship with Ari, and we knew that they were best friends. They talked every week, and yet she's almost invisible in the book he wrote. And I realized that I wanted to know more. I wanted to know more context. I wanted to problematize the story of my father as the hero. And so that's the genesis of Proud and Torn. And it just, exploded in all these different directions. But one of the reasons why it exploded is because of a particular archive, which I want to steer you to, because maybe there's a chance you might use this archive or something like it in your efforts to tell stories that are also important and relevant to the larger historical narrative. So this is an archive called Fortepon, and it is Hungarian. And I came across this archive at the same time that I was, battling the other archives in Hungary, going to Budapest and visiting the ethnographic museums and digging through the archives and ordering images that I thought would be relevant to the piece, and going to the National History Museum and sitting in the back room and having access to their ancient computer system, where I would take photographs of each image and then order the photographs based on the images that I took off the screen. I mean, it was just so hard to do this work and get these images. And of course, you have to negotiate prices, and each image that I negotiated was pretty much $25 to $50. So you can imagine, if you have a piece with 1,000 images, you couldn't afford it if you're, just a poor, artist like myself. So I came across this incredible archive called Fortepon. And Fortepon was launched in 2010, and I was in Hungary in 2013. So it was at the very beginning of this archive, making a cultural imprint on Hungarian life. Fortepon is now a household name. There are 169,000 photos in this archive. And if you just click into the archive itself, it's organized on a timeline. And as you can probably tell, I really love timelines. And it just drops you automatically into Hungarian history in 1950. So if I click into this image, you can see that image after image after image on a timeline in 1950 shows Hungary. This is Budapest, but just all images across Hungary. And actually, there's more images. This is actually in France, so it has gone beyond Hungary at this point. So I can click on any point in the timeline, and I have access to more photos. Again, 169,000 photos. And these photos are from family collections largely. They're from just people's archives, family photos. And family photos tell a different story than the official story of Hungary, than the Hungary that was documented by powerful figures and by official newspapers. When you start seeing what is available from family collections, you start seeing a kind of Hungary that's got a lot of humanity in it, that shows women as much as men, that shows characters that are maybe fascinating. And they also have some cards in here, not just photographs, some fascinating people that maybe there's a backstory behind it. And there's also lots of tags. So this archive has become a cultural institution, and people gravitate towards it whenever they add a new collection. People come and they can add a new tag. So all tagging is crowdsourced, which is really unique among archives, which tend to be more proprietary. this entire archive is released. All the images are released to the Creative Commons. So it's got a CC BY SA license, which means it's an attribution share alike license. And it basically means that anybody can use the images as long as the images are attributed. The donor and the archive itself are attributed, and the share alike means that you always have to provide a link back to the original photograph. So every photo has its own unique ID. So it captures the story of place, the story of culture, the story of traditions, the story of individual people, visual stories, and it's phenomenal. And not only that, but every image is scanned at extremely high resolution. So here's this archive of free photos. Everything is scanned at high resolution. So for somebody like me, who's a producer of, digital stories, and possibly you out there, this is just such a creative gift, because if you are working on a big project like Proud and Torn, you need to have the license to experiment with photos, to say, okay, well, I'm going to try to see if this, cutout of this boy is going to work in this way. And maybe it won't. And maybe, maybe another image would work better than this particular image. And it gave me the creativity and the freedom to explore with all aspects of photos. And in this exploration, we could make choices freely, and we didn't have to order photographs, get the high resolution finally after, maybe a week or 2 weeks, and then find out that after you pay $25, it doesn't work anymore. Or that, I just can't even tell you what a joy it was to discover this archive and realize how it set me free. To this extent that when I came back to Iowa, I decided that this was such an important initiative that I got together with some of my interactive studies colleagues and my history colleagues, and we established the first sister site of Fortepan in Hungary. So this is Fortepan, Iowa. And we have a slightly different interface, but we have a timeline where you can flip and see and access directly images from Iowa life. Very different from Hungary. I mean, Iowa is kind of like a forgotten state. We're in the middle of nowhere in terms of the US, because all the culture really happens in New York and California, right? And maybe Chicago and maybe Texas, but Iowa is kind of like a forgotten state. And here we have this ability for anyone in Iowa to download any one of these photos, download this photo and access it, a high resolution image right off the bat, and create. So what we are finding is that people are taking these images and wheat pasting them on buildings across Iowa. We're finding people putting, oops, I just closed it. Finding people putting these images on book covers and expressing them in Instagram. I know someone who runs a bakery, and she takes the images that are tagged with the word bread, and she likes to post images of bread connected to her Instagram account because, she's this really great baker. So I just want to say that Fortepan is just incredible idea. It goes against traditional archiving practices. And that's really exciting because it's a public archive for the public and for the public good. And it is about allowing people to tell stories with photographs. And it's pushing creativity to new opportunities. So I think I'll end there. And I just would love to see what you think and open it up to questions.
Sorry, you just got a round of applause then, but I didn't unmute quick enough. So you got a round of applause. Everybody was delighted. Thank you, Bettina. That was utterly fascinating. So thank you so much. Let's open up to any questions, comments, thoughts. Do you want to take over? No, it's fine. Do you want to? You can feel free to come and stand here instead of me.
Oh, I'm happy to.
You happy to ask a question?
I have questions.
Oh, Orsi's got a question. So, Orsi, please go ahead.
Do you think I can go?
You can, of course, you can come here and talk directly. Pop your face in the camera. Why not?
Is that okay?
Yeah. There's no rules in this room.
Okay.
Come on.
Hi. Oh, it's on mute. Okay. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to like monopolize it. So if other people have questions, like, please.
That's why I elbow you out the way. It's fine.
So just for context, I am Hungarian, so I was like really excited for this. And I guess one of the first questions I have is, I really noticed that sometimes you use Hungarians and sometimes you said Magyar. So I was wondering how you made that distinction, or like what was the decision based on which you like depending on which demonym you used. How did you decide that?
I don't know if I'm going to give you a good answer, because I don't know if we were really, I mean, there were definitely times when Magyar became the, I think a lot of times when we use the word Magyar, we were oftentimes critical of the nationalistic tones of what Magyar meant. So I think that maybe whenever we use Magyar, we were purposeful about the word, but I can't give you an exact example of when we were. So I feel like I'm giving you a crappy answer. So sorry about that.
Well, I think that's just like fascinating to me, because obviously you can play with it in English, but when you're talking in Hungarian, it's just a word, you know, like you can't really make that distinction. There isn't so much connotation there, like that gives it a different quality, like it's just one word. Mm-hmm. So I just thought it was really interesting.
Question, very interesting, yeah.
And I was also wondering, like, how did the idea of this project come about? But then you talked about your father's book, so I was wondering if that was kind of it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, my father is he's a kind of a wonderful guy, but also a narcissist. I just have to be. He was a person who was told his whole life that he was the most important person in the room. And he acted that way, and that's just the way he was. He called himself a patriarch, you know, and he acted like a patriarch. And so I'm a feminist, and I was really interested in understanding a little more about how he came to be, but also I wanted really to hear about the story of women in Hungary, who, as you probably know very well, are very much ignored in Hungarian history. I mean, there's just like, where are the Hungarian women? And so we made a very a big choice to make a feminist Hungarian history. And we highlight the story of women everywhere we can. In every chapter, we are trying to rise up and tell the story of women in Hungary. So.
And then another one, which is, I guess, kind of related with that, is you mentioned that you wanted to make this understandable for young people. So did you have a target audience in mind when you were doing this? Or like, who, like, is it for people in the US? Is it for, you know, like, what is the idea there?
I really did think about young people. But I also, you know how graphic novels are oftentimes, or even cartoons like Shrek or something, how they seem to be for young people, but adults also really enjoy them. And that's kind of the point of view that we took, because we understand that when you visualize something, you can oftentimes clarify in really important ways. And I'm a visual storyteller, and I love telling stories with pictures. So that is one aspect of this. But I particularly have some really strong influences, and one is Myra Coleman. Have you heard of Myra Coleman? She does a lot of covers for New Yorker magazine, which is a big literary and political magazine in the US. And she's really famous for these beautiful books that she creates that are part her own handwriting, but also her own artwork. And I'm not an artist, but I can use Photoshop. So I was really inspired by her way of taking history and making it funny, but also really complicated and visually exciting. And so Myra Coleman is a real influence. There's also another big graphic novel artist is Alison Bechtel, and she wrote Fun Home, and that was a big influence in this book as well. So the whole world of graphic novels I find are really important and really fascinating. And so we wanted to create a version of that, but digitally. So it's a digital interactive novel is what we are going for.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that there was a comment in the chat.
Sure.
So Amanda said, so interesting, Bettina. My family is from Hungary. I'm curious to know more about the program you used to set up the site. Was it all coded from scratch, or was there a base program / slide that was used to create the story?
Oh, it's all hand coded. It's all from scratch, and it was just a labor of love with me and 3 of my star students, actually. So I'm kind of oh my gosh, I love when people in my classroom are super talented, and I take them into my in my realm, and I say, you want to work with me. So Colin, who became the big coder behind the project, he was one of my students, and he learned how to code through Proud and Torn, and really sophisticated coding has gone into this project. And I'm so sorry that I can't share a template, but I would be happy to share any kind of code if you're interested. To me, it's open source. It's a free project. And so if you're interested in seeing what's behind the hood, under the hood, I'd be happy to share.
There is actually a website called Story Map. It is in no way as sophisticated as this, but offers a similar kind of experience. So if we're not all coders, which I'm certainly not a coder, but yeah, you can create something quite similar. It scrolls in the same way. You can add images, you can move across and up and down and various things.
You like Story Map, and I also like Adobe Spark. Is this called Adobe Spark? Because there was another name. But anyway, yeah, I mean, that's also Adobe Express now. Okay, so I do love Adobe Express, and I think that's a really great way of telling stories. So we wanted a little more control over our project, and we just wanted creative license because I teach code to some extent, and I was learning so much from this project. So we were almost like pushing to see how much we could do on our own and how far we could push the envelope so that we could have complete control.
And the outcome is beautiful. Absolutely worth all the time and effort that I think everybody has put in. So yeah, absolutely. I think, do we have a question from the floor?
Yeah, I was just gonna can you hear me? Right.
Do you want to come up here and talk?
Or I can just repeat your question as well.
Just to say how useful that was. I found that absolutely kind of really, really engaging. And does Bettina know who is viewing it? Does she have any sense of who's kind of watching it? Who is? So you're following on from the question about who she thought the audience was when Kenny it for. Does she know who actually is the audience?
Did you catch that, Bettina?
I didn't actually. Who is the audience?
So firstly, there was a comment saying this is incredible and awesome, and then there was the questions like, who did you? So you talked about who you had in mind for it to me, but do you have any information on who's actually viewing it? So who's so in practice, who is looking at this?
So I get emails, right? People who just stumble across it, and we weren't really successful in disseminating it as widely as we have wanted to. I mean, we don't really have like a marketing team, and so people stumble across it. I think we have we pay about $500 a year to market the words Hungary and Hungarian history and a bunch of other things. So people are reading it, but not like, it's not famous. And but we do have people who tell us like really gripping stories, like, you know, the people who do end up emailing us, and you know, people who really deeply connect with it, like people who are maybe Jewish, and there's a lot of Jewish history about Budapest, but not a lot from the countryside. And this is not a project about a Jewish family, but it is about Jewish history, because you know, out of the 200 and something Jews that were in the town where my father and my aunt grew up, only 34 survived, you know, and we tell the story of the Jews in that town. And we tell the story of anti-Semitism in Hungary. So I have people who connect with it, who are Hungarian Jews. We have people who connect with it because they're from the countryside, that they relate, that they're like, Orshi, is it Orsi or Orshi? Orshi, like Orshi, who are you living in England right now and you are Hungarian, you know? So one of the best stories that maybe I can find the visual is there's a story. Let me just try to find the visual, because I think if I can share my screen really quick. There's a guy who recognized himself in this story. So I'm just going to pop the Proud and Torn, and it's the 1945, 1940 chapter, 1945 chapter, I believe. Okay, so we have this story about my grandfather in World War II. So World War II was on the door, the very last scene of the war of World War II was in the backyard of my father's and aunt's house. And it was very scary, and they escaped, but my grandfather stayed at the farm to take care of the animals and to save whatever he could. So he withstood all sorts of bombing, all sorts of like horrible, you know, German troops and French, Russian troops, and his farm kept on changing hands, whatever. But did you see that image of the man and the cart? So there's a story about a man who said, "That's the man who saved my life. It was your grandfather. I lost both my father and my mother in the war. A bomb fell on them while they were feeding the pigs, and somebody helped me get into this cart, because they knew that this man was going, you know, back and forth on the front lines. He was delivering food to his family in another part of the on the safe side, in the German part at the time, and he realized through reading Proud and Torn that he was in that wagon, and that he and his sister were saved because of my grandfather. Never knew who my grandfather was, but just knew that he was saved by someone. So it's sort of like, wow, you know, it's like you can make connections like that, and it kind of blows your mind how small the world is sometimes. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone. We're out of time. It's 11 o'clock, but I really enjoyed being here, and I'd love to talk to you more if you're interested at any time. So
Okay, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bettina. That was really fascinating and incredible. So thank you so much. If there are any further questions, we can always field them and share them with Bettina at some other point. Okay, thank you very much.